Good evening. Let's call to order the city council meeting, special meeting for January 30th, 2023. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Perkins,
Here.
Councilmember Rubio,
Here.
Councilmember Veros,
Here.
Vice Mayor Armstrong,
Here.
and Mayor Hudson will not be with us this evening.
Okay, thank you. So tonight we have a special meeting. We've got one agenda item to discuss this evening. It's unfinished business. So this is kind of how it's going to work. We're going to hear the staff presentation and the staff report. And then as council will ask clarifying questions. And then we're going to conduct a public hearing. So we'll open the public hearing. We'll have that public hearing, listen to the public comment, then we'll close that public hearing. Then council will discuss the item. And then we'll get around to considering adoption of the resolution that's before us. So at this time, let's go ahead and proceed with the staff presentation. Cindy, you're on.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, council members and members of the public. It's my honor tonight to have our third public hearing on the general plan amendment for the 2023-2031 housing element update. Can you see? Oh, that's okay. So just a quick introduction of city staff that's been working on this effort for the last year and a half. Debbie Chamberlain, our community development director, Lauren Barr, our planning services manager, myself as the project manager, and Ryan Driscoll, our associate planner, have been working on all the different aspects of getting this document to you in front of you this evening. We also have our teaming partners, Veronica Tam and Associates is here to provide a presentation. She's worked primarily on our housing element update, and then Rincon Consultants, who is the city's environmental consultant on the general plan update, as well as the housing element. And so this evening, we'll just do a brief overview of the housing element update, the feedback we've received from the California Department of Housing and Community Development on our draft, and then where we are in terms of our next steps for this document. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Veronica to go over the housing element requirements and an overview of where we are at this point in time.
Was it Veronica?
Yes, Veronica.
Okay.
This is Cindy mentioned, we're doing this as a housing element part of the general plan. Housing element is part of your mandated element of the general plan, is subject to very rigorous statutory requirements under the government code. And there is a statutory deadline that's January 31st, 2023 for this particular update. And we currently, as part of the housing element, we have to do rezoning for sites to meet the regional housing needs allocation. That's part of the commitments of the housing element. The housing element has some key components, one being the needs assessment. We do have to look at the demographics and housing market conditions in the city of San Ramon. And we also need to look at particularly housing needs of groups that are considered special needs as defined by state law. Under state law, the special needs populations are the elderly, disabled, homeless, families with children, large households with 5 or more members, and farm workers. Those are the key special needs definitions as defined under state law. We also need to look at what you were able to accomplish over the last 8 years, and therefore whether some programs are working, some are not working. What can we do to improve the effectiveness of your housing policies? We have to look at the constraints to development, particularly governmental constraints. We do have to look at other constraints such as market and environmental and infrastructure, but you have less control over those components. You do have controls over the regulations and rules and policies that you locally enact. So governmental constraints, you're legally obligated to mitigate those. Resources and sites inventory, that's basically a very key component of the state's review of your housing element. You must provide enough sites that can facilitate and facilitate and encourage the development of a variety of housing types for all income groups. In this resources and sites inventory sections, we look at under your current policies, whether you can accommodate the RHNA, regional housing needs allocation. If not, what is the mitigating action? And then the last but not least, a recent change in state law, AB 686, affirmatively furthering fair housing, really requires the local jurisdictions to look at your housing policies and your productions in a manner that would facilitate equity within your community. The regional housing needs allocation is the key component of the state's review. It really looks at the housing needs in 4 different income categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate income. Your overall regional housing needs allocation for the 6th cycle RHNA is 5,111 units, a substantial increase compared to your 5th cycle housing element as a result of significant changes to state law. Throughout the housing element process, the city has taken a lot of community outreach and public participation in order to gather the needs and comments regarding the housing element. The community outreach process essentially took almost a year between July 2021 to 2022. We have study sessions, workshops, stakeholder meetings, community outreach events, online surveys, and also public meetings. So throughout that whole process, we were able to revise the city's policies and programs in order to meet state law. We have also made the housing element available for the public to review back in May. And the housing element was required to submit to the state for the mandatory 90-day review. After the 90-day review, we have to work on responding to HCD's comments. We did receive the state's comments on October 18, and we've made revisions in our November version, and also some recent changes, revisions as well. That's been incorporated and presented to you in your packet. We have also worked with a lot of the commissions and committees in order to come up with the strategies to rezone sites in the future in order to accommodate your regional housing needs allocation. As I mentioned before, back on October 18, we did get a comment letter from the state, and between November and December, we had multiple follow-up calls with the state in order to make sure that we understand their comments and they understand our position in certain topics, and we make revisions according to that. We also have a relatively late discussions with the state recently, and then some of the changes, again, is being incorporated into the housing element.
So at this point, all of the comments that have come from HCD have been incorporated into the
Correct.
document. So there are no outstanding issues associated with from HCD?
From our perspective, we have fully addressed their comments. We have asked them for an additional review. We have submitted shown them the revisions that we have made, and they have not indicated to us that they have any remaining comments. So we are assuming that we are good to go, but there may be some trailing technical revisions if necessary. Essentially, I think I'm just going to run through some of the key comments. I don't think that we need to go through those in detail, but in terms of the affirmatively furthering fair housing, they do want us to look at how we compare to the region, not just to the county, but to ABAC region as a whole. In terms of the needs assessment, they want us to take a deeper look at the extremely low income households. Those are people who make about 30% of the regional area median income. In terms of sites, they wanted us to provide more detail about the suitability of the site and also the existing conditions. And we also have to do a little bit more analysis in terms of your development standards and building codes, and how your overall process in terms of reviewing and approving development in the city. Particularly, they were a little bit concerned about Measure G, and that's why we added a program to address Measure G. as part of the housing element revisions. We also had to do additional programs that gives them a little bit more details about how we are going to address the variety of housing types. One key change to the programs, program 14, that added to deal with the impact of Measure G, and they also wanted us to facilitate development in your medium and single family residential zones to increase the range to 15 units per acre. Currently, it's about 12 or 14 units, so the increase to 15 units to the acre is not a very significant increase. But they do want to facilitate more variety of housing types in your lower density neighborhoods. So overall, the changes, I think a lot of them are technical in nature, but there are some programs like Measure G and then the program relating to middle income housing. That's something that's new that we had to address as part of the revisions to the state's comments.
So is that 15 dwelling units, is that includes ADU or?
Usually the density doesn't include ADUs.
Thank you.
So where we are at regarding the process is on January 12th, just like I mentioned, we had a follow-up call with the state. That was the day with the planning commission meeting. But during the day, they had some additional text edits that they requested us to do. That was incorporated as part of the planning commission's meeting. It was incorporated as errata to the planning commission, but that's been fully folded into the housing element this time, the package for you. And those revisions we have provided to the state, and that's the one that we mentioned that they had not indicated they have additional concerns. So with that, we are expecting to get once the housing element is adopted, we're expecting to get certification from the state. With that, I'll turn it back to Cindy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to just cover the typical project processing Measure G requirements. As you know, environmental review is required as part of any project. In this particular project, the city is using a categorical exemption in our government code. Essentially, because this document is a policy document, it tears off the previous general plan EAR from 2030. And ultimately, the changes made to this housing element are strictly policies, and they don't provide any entitlement to any specific land use projects. And it doesn't change any land use maps or zoning or modifies any land use designations. All of that will be done in our second phase when we do our general plan update, which is still continuing to carry forward, as well as our zoning update.
So we'll do EIR evaluation at that time?
That's correct. So there will be an environmental impact report with the general plan 2040 update that will cover both the general plan as well as the rezoning.
So is that CEQA, are we going to get per site or is it going to be the general? Sorry, I missed I think I missed that point, like per housing site, we are going to get the CEQA or? So CEQA analysis has already been done for the housing element to cover the analysis of this project. The project is essentially a policy document that will then require implementation through a rezoning as well as land use map changes through the general plan. Those documents will have an environmental impact report to analyze the impacts associated with the rezoning. And so the environmental analysis has been done as part of this project, but it qualifies for an exemption under state law. But there will be additional environmental review that's done as part of the general plan update, as well as the rezoning that will occur. Okay, and we can do that. So
that's correct.
Noticed. Okay, thank you.
So one of the things I did want to just cover is, as Veronica had mentioned, there is a statutory deadline of January 31st that the Bay Area region is obligated to adopt our housing elements. Essentially, after January 31st, our current housing element, which is referred to as our fifth cycle element, expires. And so you need to have a housing element in place and adopted by the city in order to continue to maintain a certified or an adopted housing element. And so tonight's effort is looking to get city council authorization to adopt that housing element, repeal the existing housing element, and then send our adopted plan to the state for certification. HCD approval is not required for housing elements to be found substantially compliant. Cities can, if we don't have a letter from HCD saying that we're in compliance, we can make our own findings of consistency with HCD's findings. It's encouraging that before we had our January 12th Planning Commission meeting, that HCD reached out and provided us with their comments on the latest draft so that we could incorporate those into our draft that the Planning Commission recommended approval for this evening. And so we're confident that based on the findings that have been made in HCD's letters and their calls with us, that we have a substantially compliant housing element. There are obligations once this city does certify or adopt our housing element. We do have to send it up to the state for their certification. And there are requirements related to if you are in compliance by January 31st, there are deadlines for the rezoning. The city's intention is to continue to work on the rezonings, which we've been doing since the start of the general plan update. And our goal is this summer to have those zoning updates in front of the Planning Commission and City Council for their review. And so a lot of we previously had a meeting in November where we provided an update where we were at with the state, and we had explained that one of the implications of noncompliance is a provision of state law called builder's remedy, and we'd covered that builder's remedy has requirements for streamlining. If the city is not has not adopted our housing element by January 31st, it allows for developers to file an application for housing development projects as long as they have a minimum number of affordable units in any zone or land use designation in the city. That land use does not have to be a residential zone. They could file for a development application essentially on any land use. So hopefully after our public hearing and questions related to the housing element this evening, and we receive feedback on the application, if appropriate, we're recommending that City Council adopt the attached resolution, which would repeal the current housing element and then approve our new housing element for this upcoming 2023-2031 planning period. If we fail to do that, again, the implications of that include builder's remedy as well as potential funding that the city relies on may be withheld until we do have an adopted housing element. And so with that concludes my presentation. If there's any additional questions for me, I could certainly take those now, or Veronica as well.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead with clarifying questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, first and foremost. So one question that I did have, I know you explained what special needs under the law refers to, but as you know, legally protected groups are also very distinct in their own right. I just want to make sure, is it possible to please separate any reference to people with disabilities as a separate group, not under special needs?
So I'm going to bring up Veronica to answer that question so she can tell us the requirements under state law and whether that can.
Sure.
In the special needs assessment, we cannot. Your housing element would not be considered complete if you don't talk to them about them. But in the special needs discussion, we do have discussions on each separate group. So it's not lumped as a special needs group in the housing element. We have a subsection on each type of special needs group. In addition to that, under in the constraint section of the housing element, we do have a separate section on providing housing opportunities for persons with disabilities. So that's looking at persons with disabilities a little differently because their housing needs are a little different. And then in the appendix, when we looked at affirmatively furthering fair housing, that is a little different because that's related to protected classes. Protected classes under fair housing laws go way beyond special needs group. Protected classes in California, race, familial status, marital status, and ethnicity, color, medical conditions, and disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of that are protected under fair housing laws. Those are covered under the affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis. So there are very distinct sections of the housing element that deals with different types of laws and different classes and groups.
So the reason I ask is because that term itself in reference to any person with disabilities is considered offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think even if you say, oh, it's people with disabilities and other people, it's like you're still putting people with disabilities under that category. And so that's why I was asking if you could separate it out of respect for the community.
I think it's in the special needs population, again, we have different subsections for different groups. So they're not lumped together. So if that's your concern, but in the housing element law, we do have to specifically address persons with disabilities as a separate group.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I just prefer if we just kind of keep it separate so that
They are
clear.
separate. They're not lumped under, we're not talking about special needs groups as just one big group. It's each one has its own characteristics, their special needs. Elderlies have different special needs, families, large families would have special needs, but they are all overlapping too, because persons with disabilities can also be elderly, can also be homeless. So there are a lot of interaction among all these groups, or overlapping characteristics among all these groups. So there's distinct, but they have, I wouldn't say correlation, but they're related also issues too.
I understand that. I think I've made my
Any other questions?
concern clear. I just think that what I'm trying to make clear is that applying that term in any capacity to people with disabilities is offensive. That's my point.
I understand, but under state law, we do have to deal with that.
Okay, so then we have to change state law.
Go for it.
Go for it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Councilmember Perkins.
Yes, builder's remedy. Without a letter from HCD that says you've done it, big stamp on it or whatever. We're relying on the fact that we are what do you call it? We're going to self-certify.
Correct.
We're going to self-certify based upon communications we've had with HCD and the fact that we believe we've answered all their things. So now a builder comes in and says, I want to tear down the Safeway, the movie theater, the McDonald's, and the whole package. We're going to build 500 homes and we will have affordable housing there. They claim builder's remedy because we don't have the letter. We claim we self-certified. How does that get resolved?
Sure. So the Housing Accountability Act specifically identifies that a city has the not just the Housing Accountability Act, but also government code. I think it's 65585. So it specifically identifies that the city has the authority to self-certify, and identifies that the process in which a city would self-certify and the language that we have to include in the resolution, which has been included in tonight's resolution, and that after we have self-certified, we are then obligated to send that document to the state so that they confirm our self-certification. And there is still language in government code that specifies after we've self-certified and after HCD has provided their comments on our adopted housing element, that there's still a process after that for the state to have cities address comments that we may receive. Part of the resolution in front of you this evening includes a clause that allows cities to provide authority to the community development director to make just technical, non-substantive changes. And that's been a way that HCD has addressed lingering comments that they might have with the draft. But builder's remedy only requires that if a city does not have an adopted housing element, that provision applies. As long as we have adopted our housing element, we're in compliance, and therefore builder's remedy should not apply to the city.
Yeah, there was an article in the Bay Area Press that there are builders waiting for February 1, and it's going to affect many dozens of cities. They claim that builder's remedy projects will descend upon dozens of cities within the first few weeks of February. And grateful we won't be one of them. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Burrows.
Thanks for presentation, and thanks for all the tedious work that you and your whole team has to go through. So few questions. I just want to make sure community is aware of all the due diligence, that work that you and your team did on this process. So did we appeal on ABAG about this whole RHNA numbers, and what was the outcome?
Sure. So leading up to ABAG providing us the final regional housing needs allocation for San Ramon, there is a process that cities can appeal our draft RHNA number. So our allocated 5,111 unit number. The city did appeal that number. We asked them to consider some of the trends that have been happening in the city as far as replacement of jobs and land uses that were primarily commercial in nature and now being redeveloped for residential, and that some of their methodology and models did not include those factors. Ultimately, every appeal that was filed in the Bay Area region was denied. So every city that submitted an appeal, they were all rejected, and the same numbers that were released in the draft in the summer of 2021, that those numbers did not change in December 2021 when they were finally released as final.
My next question is about the services, municipal services. A lot of whenever we have conversations with community residents, one of the questions they come up is about water, school enrollment, and roads, the infrastructure basically. So are these municipal services, are they took into consideration when we are working towards planning and housing site opportunities?
So I'd say that we're addressing water services, sewer services, school obligations. All of those things are taken into consideration when we are evaluating new housing. It included unique to Contra Costa County is our requirement for Measure G, which requires us to consider growth management impacts, like services to water and what new housing development could potentially impact those services and facilities. Any new housing development project that comes into the city of San Ramon does have to analyze the growth management impacts, and has to have those services available to that housing development. Once the city's housing element is adopted, that document then goes to the water and sewer providers so that they have a copy of the city's document and can identify our priority housing sites, our housing opportunity sites. There is a provision in state law that does require that water and sewer providers provide services to projects that provide affordable housing. And so it's one of the ways that the state is working with these housing element obligations is having this priority of water service to affordable housing projects. So a lot of interaction with water and service providers, the school district, anytime that we're looking at a new development. This just sets in place the plan for how our housing needs are going to be met. Once that project actually becomes a project, they still have their obligations under the city's growth management requirements to also make sure that they're able to get service from those service providers.
So let's say in future, one of the housing development, if East Bay Mud or Water Zone 7, if they come back and say that, hey, we cannot provide you water. So what happens to that site?
Well, so most of the city's housing opportunity sites are within the service boundaries of the water and sewer districts. There are water management plans that are long-range plans that show that they can provide water service to within our service area. But every project does require that they provide documentation that they can obtain water and sewer service from those providers. And so that's part of our development review process, is to make sure that with any approval that we have, they have the letters confirming that they have services available to them from the different districts that provide it.
Okay. One question I always get about is our roads, right? Especially the traffic challenges that we are facing. Already Bollinger Canyon Road connecting to our interstate is like major headache for many residents who are morning trying to commute to their workplace. So are we including that? Do we have that as part of this plan about the traffic mitigation, how we are going to handle all these things?
So I should preface this in terms of state housing law. The priority that the state has said is for cities to plan for housing. They've included over the last couple of years a lot of exemptions from traffic studies, CEQA requirements, and so there's less and less of a focus from state law on other impacts other than providing affordable housing in the cities. But with every project that will come before the city that proposes to be developed here, there will be an analysis that's done as far as the traffic impacts from each development project. Some of those projects may qualify for an exemption. Some of them may require additional traffic studies. It depends on the size of that project and how many more people it adds to the traffic. But all of that's done as part of the analysis with each project that is proposed. And so even though this is a policy document that identifies future housing opportunity sites, the actual analysis of how those traffic impacts are going to affect the city is done on a project by project basis.
Okay, so that I'll piggyback on that. So in that case, do we have any can we as a city impose any qualitative design constraints in that case? Like, for example, right now, quantitatively, we just got the number, right? We need to go with it. But on qualitative designs, that can we put any impose on those housing sites when they're building up? Okay, you need to build this size this much and all those things. Can we do from as a city?
So the focus really has shifted from from traffic delay, so level of service, to now vehicle miles traveled. And the analysis that we do as far as the traffic study is really geared from a CEQA standpoint on how does this project impact the number of miles traveled, which has implications for greenhouse gases and hours that people are spending on the roads. So there's less of an emphasis as far as how long a delay is at a traffic light or a stop sign needing to become a traffic signal. But, ultimately, that is still part of the analysis that we do with any project, is that we do analyze the traffic implications, but they're going to be limited to objective design standards that can go into that project. And so we also have capital improvement projects, the 5-year CIP that will direct how capacity on roadways and expansions or changes from stop signs to signals. We primarily rely on that as far as the growth that we expect in the city to direct the capital improvement project so that we can address the potential growth that we're going to expect over the next 20 years.
Thanks for explaining on builder's remedy and also losing state fund. Are there any other financial penalties that we may face if we cannot complete by tomorrow?
Well, so state funding goes anywhere from grants that we have to actually complete our general plan document. We've received a number of grants to actually fund our ability to do these policy long-range documents. There are also community development block grants and transportation funding dollars. So when we say we lose money, it's a wide range of different funding sources, from traffic all the way to future capital improvement projects and our policy documents that we need to plan for the next 20 years.
So do we have like a rough number?
I don't have a rough number, but just on the
Very significant.
Yeah, just on the general plan itself, we're getting $200,000 just for to be able to complete that document. There's our update to our Crocaine specific plan. We got funding for that project to update our specific plan as well. That was another $200,000 plus the ADU design that we're doing. That project also got $50,000, I believe, in funding for that. So a number of the projects that planning works on to be able to plan for all the state changes, that funds a lot of the work that we do to try to keep ahead of state law.
So I already asked this question about these ADUs, right? So that is going to be not going to be included as part of this 5111 that we received, right? So
no, actually, so let me clarify. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs that are referred to, ADUs does count towards the city's 5,111 unit obligation. So any additional units that we're adding that's considered an ADU can count towards our city's obligation for regional housing needs. But typically the density that's increased as a result of somebody adding an ADU, that's typically not included in the density. So if a site has a maximum of 6 dwelling units per acre, we're only counting the 6 units of single family or multifamily units. If anybody proposes an ADU, that's not included in that 6 dwelling unit cap.
Not in the density wise, but that is added as towards the RHNA number.
Right. So the city does get credit for ADU construction. That's one of the big goals that the state has pushed with cities is trying to build a variety of housing types, and with cities like Saramone, where we do have a lot of single family units, that's one of the housing types that they're hoping that will with funding and with other changes with local requirements, be able to create additional ADU to provide another type of unit in the city.
And one last question, is there any highlight or important point that our community need to know what this includes related to the climate action control or greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, so I would point out that there's a couple of different sections in our housing plan. It talks about different constraints and different needs of the community, but there's also a program section that's in our in the section 11.5, I believe, and it has all the different programs associated with how the city plans to implement our housing element. In there's programs specifically geared towards green building, energy conservation. And so there are a number of programs that are assisting on the climate action side, but we will, as part of the general plan update, also have an update to the city's climate action plan. And so that will be another opportunity for the city to look at what policies and programs we can implement to address climate action.
Sounds good. Thanks. Thank you, Cindy.
Vice Mayor, I had one more.
You have another?
But yeah, I didn't
Go ahead.
finish. Sorry. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to all of you for all the hard work you put into this, because this was well before I got here. So thank you to all of you, actually, on the board and on the commission. So one of the things I just wanted to just clarify for for the residents as well is that this is not actually defining like the fine details. It's just kind of laying the road, like a general map of what tools we will have to work with and what we can do with it, right?
That's correct. Right.
And as a kind of an extension, just kind of clarifying. So the question that Councilmember Veros mentioned is that as we build, we roll things out. That's going to be in sync with assuring that we have all of our resources available intact in a timely manner. So we will obviously be working with the water districts, the schools, what have you.
That's right.
Okay. And then, so same thing goes, like one of the things, I know I was really looking at program 10, because that's something that's very near and dear to my heart for personal reasons, but also, just kind of as we talk about parking availability, one of the things that I want to make sure is that we make sure to reserve spots for, again, individuals with disabilities, because they are under very unique circumstances there. And, just make sure that we somehow guarantee parking for all who need that under those acute circumstances.
Yeah. And, in addition to California requirements for parking for people with disabilities, we also in our zoning ordinance have a reasonable accommodations clause that allows for people who may have certain circumstances where parking or access is necessary, that there's accommodations for that. So it is something that at various levels, we not just have the general details, but we also have those fine details that are specifically included in our zoning documents.
Yeah. It's just like making sure that there's like a reserved spot, because especially multifamily units, sometimes they have to make it available to even people who are guests and may be people with disabilities, right? But then what happens is there's not enough spots now for even the people who are living there and are people with disabilities. So I think it would be nice to kind of think of, those are the kind of things that I'm saying we could think ahead later on and refine all of this to meet all of the needs of everybody in our community. And, making sure that, as we try to meet these goals, we're not overlooking the concerns and interests of individuals.
Great. Thank you for that
Thank you.
feedback.
And thank you for a great job. I know
Thank
you guys
you.
worked hard.
Cindy, before you go, can you just clarify on a builder's remedy? If we were not to adopt the housing element tonight, you know, there's some implications there. How long are those in effect? Is it that until we self-certify? Or what's the kind of the duration of that till we're, you know, that comes off the table?
The builder's remedy provision applies so long as the city does not have an adopted housing element. And so for some cities who haven't even submitted their documents to HCD, it's going to be quite difficult to self-certify because they don't have the feedback from the state. We're lucky enough to have had that first letter and then 5 additional calls since then. And so our self-certification is pretty strong in terms of that we feel that we've addressed all of the state's comments that they've provided to us. But there will be some cities that on February 1st could see a privately owned park site or a privately owned office or commercial building potentially have a new application for residential development.
Okay. And you mentioned that would apply to any property in the city, regardless of how it's owned. I mean, that includes open space, recreation, golf courses, things like that.
So there hasn't been any builder's remedy applications in the Bay Area. And so, but we are seeing the wave of that happening in Southern California and a number of cities where that the examples that you provided, those are cases where you're seeing applications come in. There are still requirements that they have to have a complete application and that they have to have the necessary environmental review. But barring that, and because of SB 330, there's a streamlined review now. So potentially they may be done with their 5 public hearings under SB 330, so long as they can meet their CEQA requirements, but be done and under construction before a city gets their document adopted.
Thank you. And there was a letter in there from East Bay Mud deep into the packet. And there was a section on recycled water. And I was a little bit confused by that. It made it seem like there is currently a moratorium on, I guess, probably connecting, or maybe, is that you can't even build with new units with recycled, purple pipes and things like that? Or is it just you can't connect them at this time?
So I don't think there's a restriction to put in the infrastructure in place that would eventually connect. I think there's just with the recycled water, there's a bit of a demand or shortage or different obligations that they've already made with those water districts for other projects. And so right now that may not be available. It doesn't prevent a project from including that as part of their infrastructure for, the future if there was that availability. But with any new development project that we have, we always engage the water provider to see if recycled water is an option and if that's something that could be incorporated in, because there are benefits to allowing for recycled water, but it just has to be available.
Okay. And then final question on also somewhere in the packet in the section on housing opportunity sites, there's reference to underutilized properties. I wasn't sure how we define an underutilized property. And is this kind of a land to value comparison, or how do you figure what property is underutilized and what is not, because we've defined it here?
So I'm going to look for the dictionary definition with Veronica. I'm sure she knows it.
There is actually no dictionary definition of
said it.
underutilized, but we used a variety of factors to determine whether the property has potential for redevelopment. For example, what is the existing floor area ratio compared to what it could be? What about the land to improvement value, that if the land is worth more than the improvement on site? We also look at the existing uses, existing FAR. We looked at vacancy rates. We also looked at developer interest and property owner interest, whether they think they can, their current uses are kind of outdated or obsolete, that they would want to intensify. We also looked at the trends of redevelopment in the region, like what type of uses that are being redeveloped. So in the housing element, the sites inventory, we list a number of factors that we use to identify what constitute an underutilized site. So it's a number of about 6 or 7 factors that we looked at.
Okay, thank you. And any final questions?
I have,
You got one?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
so if I remember right, you already answered this question, but just again, for community residents who are listening for their benefit, is there any city in California won a suit or lawsuit against state for reappealing these numbers of RENA, like RENA allocations?
Has any
Any city, did
been
they sue
successful?
and won against state of California?
So I wouldn't say that there was a lawsuit, but there was an appeal of RENA. There were, I believe it was 2 cities in the Southern California region that their appeal was successful, in part because I think the situation was that there was a dam, and so the dam, there was some concern about potential flooding, and so the number of units that they had associated with the city because of the flood risk, that there was a need to adjust for that. But those numbers then went to another city in order to be able to continue to meet their regional obligation. And then I think another one where they had assigned numbers, but there was an area that actually didn't belong to the city. So it wasn't under their jurisdiction to allow housing there. So they had shifted those numbers as well. But so far as I know, those were the only 2 cities in Southern California that was successful in their appeal.
Okay. And this question for Martin mostly. On imposing the local jurisdiction laws, is it possible for us to put any impositions, like say, the priorities of housing availability should go for, let's say, for our San Ramon school teachers, or can we impose any such local jurisdictions?
These are like deed restrictions.
Yeah, like the priority wise.
Applying local preferences for your residents or special groups generally consider a violation of fair housing laws, because as part of the fair housing, you do have to facilitate mobility among jurisdictions with people who have the freedom to move around. There is a new state law that would allow jurisdictions to consider local preferences such as that. But you do have to, the reason for doing those local preferences have to be based on anti-displacement and tenant protection. And you also have to be able to make the finding that the people that you're protecting are the similar characteristics as the people in the region. If your demographics is very different than the region, it would be very difficult to adopt local preferences like that, because then you become the concept is that you become an exclusive community by doing local preferences like that. So there is a new way to do it, but you have to be very careful, and that's I think there's new state law that just went into effect this year. So, but you do have to be very careful.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Veronica. And that was an incredibly detailed staff report and an analysis, so all 554 pages of it. And at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I'll move we open the public comment, open the public hearing and take public comment.
Okay,
I second.
we got a move, we got a second. Any discussion? Okay, I am looking to vote here. Okay, the public hearing is now open. Do we have any speaker cards this evening?
Yes, we've received one speaker card from Country Code 886 Taiwan.
Okay, thank you. Remember, this is on specific to tonight's specific agenda.
Yes,
and,
may I see the clock?
And please, yes, keep it to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so I haven't started speaking, but first of all, I find the council extremely stealthy for not disclosing who the main presenter is. Her name is Veronica. What is her last name? What organization is she from? Why is she qualified to stand up here to address you on this particular agenda that has our staff name on it, Cindy E? Why do I need to listen to her? You should have disclosed who she is. This is a bluff. When council member asked her, please provide, disability population, and please do not address them or include them, I heard in her presentation. She just went around in circle and did not answer her question. Who is she? What disrespect? Nobody got mad. None of you disclosed her name. I resent that. I would like her name and her organization right now. And please stop my clock. I deserve to know that.
Thank you.
I have more, but I need to know who she is.
She was introduced at the beginning of the meeting and she.
I was
represented
on the whole
Icon
time.
Consultants.
I was on the whole time. I didn't hear you disclose
heard
her
her.
name and nor her organization. You know what? They didn't stop my clock. It's unfair to me. I'm going to continue. So there are all just opposition in the public comments in the red folder. None of them addressed oppositions from taxpayers. Furthermore, I would like to know, what is Veronica's definition of farmers? I just read, we had recent a shooting by a Chinese quote unquote farmer in Half Moon Bay. That's in Contra Costa County. I thought farmers are mostly Latino. Why are we now having Chinese? And I noticed that these are all Chinese or Asians in nature. I'm Asian. This is not racist. This is about addressing what this is about. This is about communist China trying to deflect their poor us so we can pay for it. We're not the only country who is receiving these people, includes Japan, includes European countries. This is a scam. Furthermore, last year, the city had changed what you had allowed the builder to build as senior housing. Then you said our seniors are too rich. Then you opened it up for whatever. All these are a scam. Gavin Newsom should be locked up. He has no right to tell you what to build, and that's why he allows you to certify. He wants to build these housing, build it on state land. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers?
No speaker cards. We do
Anyone?
have one hand raised.
Okay,
Jim Blickenstaff.
so just as a reminder, yeah, raise your hand on Zoom or *9 on your telephone and please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you. Go ahead, Jim.
Hello, Jim Blickenstaff. I sent a comment letter in a little earlier, and I hope you had time to read it. It was kind of short and sweet. And so, so I wanted to just touch on it very briefly here, just for a second. And also mention in the beginning that population of California has gone down. The last statistic I saw on it was 300,000. So some of this housing crisis issue is in quotes only. It hasn't materialized. And to the extent they're trying to deal with affordable housing, all the bills that have passed have basically failed on that. So we're kind of chasing an illusion of solving housing that may not need to be solved, and ignoring affordable housing. That's the general comment on what we're up against with city special, state special interests. And in particular, I still focus on the housing opportunity sites because they can make a place vulnerable for housing when in fact it's more appropriate for retail. We have a specific example in Marketplace where I believe there's still a housing opportunity site in place that encourages the development of a few dozen houses, and then by the mapping site allows the destruction of a great site for retail, a site that has a structure already on it. And that seems absurd to me because they're so precious. The sites for retail are so precious these days. You have a critical location and you're trading it off for 44 houses. And it makes no sense. So I'd say, let's do a little more discretion on housing opportunity sites, especially when the essence of them is to the removal of any opportunity for a major retail. That's a terrible trade-off. So let's also remember, we as a city need retail opportunity sites. They're not to be sacrificed for mandates or whatever you call them from the state for just a focused interest. So that's kind of an ad lib from what the note said, but I hope you appreciate where I'm trying to come from on protecting the city for its own long-term best interests. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on Zoom or phone?
There are no more speakers.
Okay, thank you. Then like to get a motion to close.
We close the public hearing and public comments.
Okay, move.
I second.
Perkins, second, Veros.
Vice Mayor Armstrong,
Yes.
prior to the close of vote, I do need to let you know that written public comment was received from Jim Blickenstaff and also from East Bay for Everyone, which has been provided to the city council and is located in the red binder in the back of the room.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. We did get copies of that and that'll be part of the public record. Oh, can we open it back up? Is there a way to get Councilmember Rubio's vote here?
Yes.
Okay, so
Sorry.
we'll record that as a yes vote.
Yes,
So
sorry.
the public hearing is closed. So at this time, it's before the council for any additional comments, and then we'll move forward from that.
I'd like to address Mr. Blickenstaff. I absolutely agree that sacrificing retail sites for housing is bad policy. However, we had to find places for more than 5,111 housing units throughout the city, and there's really not that many vacant spaces. And with an 85-foot height limitation that Jim Blickenstaff is very familiar with, because he was part of the lawsuit and the settlement agreement that established the 85-foot limit. It's really hard to build 5,111 units and not sacrifice either commercial property or retail property. Our staff struggled with that for many, many weeks, and the planning commission and the council, and we said yes to this one and no to that one, and cut this one in half and save that parcel, and we'll sacrifice that part. And we did it over and over and over again. And unless you, Jim, you want to raise that height limit to 200 or 300 feet, so we can put a couple of hundred units per acre. Maybe if we had 1,000 units per acre, we could sacrifice 5 acres and solve the whole problem. I don't know. But this was an extremely difficult problem to solve. I went through many, I'll be honest, there are hundreds of opportunity sites And I went through many of them and to identify where they were and what offices and what shopping centers we were potentially going to sacrifice. And honestly, I think the staff did a wonderful job of sorting through it and making it happen. And I know we've got more than a 20% buffer, because when builders build, they don't always build at the maximum density. We found in the past they built it was about 75% of the density is the of the limit. And so we cannot assume that they're always going to build at maximum density. It's obvious that we need to adopt the resolution tonight and certify this. The consequences of not doing it are just unthinkable. And I want to thank Veronica and her team. They really did a fabulous job. There's an awful lot of writing that goes into 500. How many pages?
54.
554 pages. An awful lot of writing goes into 554 pages. And it really is a remarkable document to think that the HCD has actually read it themselves and provided comments back to us. So, Jim, I agree with you that it's an absolute travesty to sacrifice these locations, but I would challenge you. I wish you were here commenting a year ago to help us find those housing opportunity sites that didn't include some of the ones that you spoke of, because we could have used your wisdom, obviously. Thank you again for all the hard work that went into this, and I know we're not done because we have a whole general plan update and a whole zoning and a whole climate action plan. None of our planning staff is going to be looking for something to do. There's more than enough to do, and our planning commissioners are going to be busy, and I know they're busy next week with the Chevron Park process. So thank you very much for the work you've done, and I look forward to adopting our housing element.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rubio.
I would just, a lot of this happened before my time here, but I do commend you for the hard work that you've put, everybody who's been involved in this process put in. I'm sure I know it wasn't easy. I kind of echo what Councilmember Perkins has said. I mean, we do have a situation where obviously looking at the cost benefit, I mean, it's clear that we have to move forward at this point to make sure that we have the resources needed to meet our RHNA goals and that we maintain oversight in terms of how we build out. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Rose.
Thank you, staff, for such a tedious work. I know you put so much due diligence in that, in making this happen. Thanks to our community for providing feedback. I know you did your outreach as much as possible through our planning San Ramon. And also there is a student group who did involve in this through my internship, that they also provided the feedback to me on what are the housing needs they are looking for. So thanks for everyone to participate in this process. It's like almost 1.5 year process, right? So we went through all the possible options, and a lot of community residents, they sent emails, they provided feedback. We did listen to all that feedback, especially their worries about the water or school enrollment or about the traffic. And as Cindy mentioned, that whenever this whole process is about housing element update, it's not like final development plan. So whenever each development comes up, definitely we will make sure that we will thoroughly vet through those development applications and make sure that they go through all the process and make sure they are address the community residents' concerns about the water or school enrollment or grocery stores or whatever the municipal services that they are needed, they are going to be part of our analysis. So I just want to make sure they should be confident about that. And also during the League of California Cities event, pretty much majority of council members in that event were all talking about these RENA numbers, RENA allocations, not just our city. Pretty much every city is going through this pain, and it's pretty challenging. And thankfully, we have such an excellent staff that you came out with creatively all those possible options that we have. I really appreciate that. And definitely we want to approve this. The one key reason is we don't want to jeopardize our interest in our city, right? We don't want to just hand over our whole housing planning process. We just don't want to lose that control. And imagine if we lose it and then next day the building, it will pop up everywhere in the open space, all the hills and anywhere it can be possible. Imagine if Builders Remedy can come up and then they start submitting applications and building wherever they want. So we don't want to get into that situation. We did, City of San Ramon went through this many times. I wasn't there in that council, but this time I'm here to participate in all this tedious process. And but one thing I'm confident that whatever we went through in the past, we could able to go through thoroughly, and we were successful. And I'm confident that we can be successful in future also, how we are going to build our San Ramon as a community. So once again, thanks to all council members for their feedback also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just echo the comments of my fellow council members. An incredible amount of work. Thank you to the staff that's put a lot of time and effort into this. Our contracted consultant, Rincon and Veronica. Thank you so much. I know there was a lot of public outreach. Some of those key dates and things are in there. I know there's a lot more behind the scenes and also responding to emails. A lot of the different stakeholders provided input. Our public provided input, not just prior to tonight's meeting, but at tonight's meeting. So thank you for that input. And I know there was a lot of back and forth with HCD as well, and kind of resolving some of those issues that they brought up during the process. So thank you for, it's like sausage making. That's not easy, but hopefully it's going to be a good product. I also want to thank our planning commission. I know, we're having our third public hearing here, but we've had some joint meetings with our planning commission, and they've had some of their own meetings. And so I want to thank them for their insights and helping to shape the housing element that we're seeing before us tonight in the resolution. So, but as said, there are consequences if we don't adopt the housing element tonight. And we've lost enough local control. I would hate to see us lose additional local control by having to kind of give in to the whole builder's remedy. So with that said, I will say that I intend to support tonight's resolution, and I look forward to continuing discussions and work ahead should we adopt it. Got a lot more work to do on the general plan update and the climate action plan, the zoning ordinance. We've had a lot of discussion on definition of a mixed use and objective design standards and things like that. There's a lot of things still out there, and so it's a busy road ahead. But you've gotten us thus far, and again, I want to thank you for getting us to this point tonight. And with that, I'd like to entertain a motion. Looks like we have a motion and a second, and just need a vote, and we end the vote. And so with that, the resolution, which is 2023-017, approving the general plan amendment, 2021-0001 for the housing element update of the general plan for the 2023-2031 planning period, as well as the CEQA portion of that is adopted, and I thank you all for this evening. Any final administrative things from city attorney, city manager, clerks, staff? If not, thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.